The cold was a constant companion, a lover more intimate than any queen had ever been. It lived in King Caelan's bones, a marrow of ice. From his throne of obsidian and silver, he surveyed the throne room, seeing it not as a hall of power, but as a cage of grey echoes. The courtiers' bows were blurs of colour without meaning. Their murmured pleasantries were sounds without substance, like stones rattling in a tin cup. For 300 years, the Frostheart curse had been his shadow and his shield, encasing his heart in a slow creeping glacier that had finally, utterly, numbed everything. He felt nothing, not joy, not sorrow, not rage. There was only a profound, hollow stillness, a silence of the soul that was far more deafening than any sound. His alpha instincts, the primal core of his being, were muted, buried under leagues of permafrost. He ruled with logic as sharp and cold as a shard of glass, his justice unwavering, his mercy non-existent. His people feared him, his enemies respected him, and no one, not a single soul, knew the truth of his affliction. They saw a king of immense control. He knew himself to be a prisoner in a fortress of his own flesh. The only crack in that icy facade was the decade-long ache of absence. 10 years ago, his son, his only heir, had vanished from the royal nursery. A betrayal, a kidnapping, an act of war. The details were lost to time and failed investigations. But a father's bond, even one frozen by a curse, was a relentless thing. It was the one ghost of a feeling that the ice could not completely entomb. For 10 years his spies had scoured the 5 kingdoms. For 10 years they had found nothing. Until last week. A whisper. A rumour of a boy with eyes of silver, the unmistakable mark of the royal bloodline, living in a forgotten village at the edge of the Whispering Woods. Now, the tracking rune on the map spread before him pulsed with a faint ethereal light. It had finally found a lock. A location, his son. The thought should have ignited a fire of triumph within him. Instead, it was merely a single cold fact laid upon 1,000 others. He would go. He would retrieve what was his. He would secure his lineage. The mission was a matter of state, a logical progression of duty. He did not allow himself to think of it as anything more. To hope for warmth was a folly he had abandoned centuries ago. Elara felt the weight of their stares like a physical shroud. In the centre of the village market, with the scent of baked bread and sawdust in the air, she was an island of scorn. Her older sister, Lyra, stood before her, hands on her hips, her voice a sharp, cruel instrument designed for public humiliation. Still playing mother to that little stray, are we? Lyra's words cut through the market's low hum, drawing more eyes. An Omega who cannot even bear her own pup, wasting her life on some nameless whelp found in the dirt. Elara's hand tightened on the small, warm one tucked into hers. Leo, her son in every way that mattered, pressed closer to her leg. His silver eyes, wide and unnervingly perceptive for a boy of 10, watched the exchange. He did not cry. He had learned long ago that tears only sharpened the barbs of others. Elara kept her chin high, her gaze steady on her sister. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction of her pain. "He is my son," Elara said, her voice quiet but firm, a stone against which Lyra's waves of malice crashed and broke. "He is a burden," Lyra spat. "A reminder of your failure. You bring shame on our family, living in that hovel with it. Shame, the word used to burn her. Now it was just a sound. For 10 years she had been an outcast, an Omega who had never gone into heat, never scented a mate, never fulfilled her biological purpose. Then she had found Leo, a babe wrapped in a tattered but noble-looking cloak, abandoned at the edge of the woods. In that moment, her purpose had become clear. It was not the one the world demanded of her, but it was hers. Loving him was the only truth she needed. She looked down at Leo, at the fierce, protective set of his small jaw, and her own resolve hardened into something unbreakable. She met her sister's hateful glare. "I would rather have his love than your family's honour." Lyra recoiled as if struck. With a final venomous sneer, she turned and swept away, leaving Elara and Leo in a pocket of charged silence. The villagers quickly looked away, busying themselves with sacks of flour and bolts of cloth, but Elara could still feel their judgment, cold and sharp on her skin. She squeezed Leo's hand gently. "Let's go home," she whispered, turning away from the market, away from the life that had never wanted her, and toward the small, love-filled cottage that was her entire world. Kaelin rode alone. His royal guard trailed a respectful half-mile behind, a silent concession to his desire for solitude. The air grew cooler as he neared the edge of the whispering woods. But it was a coolness external to him, a thing he observed rather than felt. The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and fallen leaves. The tracking rune on his gauntlet pulsed brighter, its light a cold silver fire against the black steel. It led him not into the woods, but to a small, thatched roof cottage nestled at its border. Smoke curled from its chimney, a fragile plume of grey against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. It was an unremarkable dwelling, humble and worn. Yet the rune burned with an undeniable certainty. He was here. His son was here. He dismounted, his boots making no sound on the soft earth. The stillness of the place was absolute. He approached the door, a simple plank of wood weathered by years of sun and rain. He raised a gauntleted fist to knock, the metal cool and familiar against his knuckles. Duty, logic, retrieval, these were the pillars of his purpose. He braced himself for the confrontation, for the pleas or threats of whatever peasant had kept his heir. He was prepared for anything. He was not prepared for her. The door swung open, and the world tilted on its axis. She was nothing, an omega, her scent faint and clean like fresh rain and chamomile, not the cloying sweetness he associated with her kind. She was plainly dressed, her brown hair tied back from a face that was neither beautiful nor plain, but simply present. Her eyes, the colour of moss after a storm, widened slightly in surprise. And then it happened. For the first time in 300 years, Kaelin felt something. It was not an emotion. It was more fundamental than that. It was warmth, a tiny, shocking flicker deep within the frozen cavern of his chest. It was like seeing a star ignite in a dead sky, a sensation so alien he almost staggered back. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A thawing. His curse, the unyielding ice, recoiled from it. His gaze locked with hers, and for a breathless second, the hollow silence in his soul was filled with a strange, terrifying hum. Elara felt the change in the air before she even saw him, a sudden, oppressive cold that had nothing to do with the evening chill. A presence so immense it seemed to suck the very breath from the world. When the knock came, it was not a sound but a vibration that travelled up from the soles of her feet. She opened the door, expecting a lost traveller, perhaps a village elder. The man standing on her threshold was not a man. He was a monument carved from winter and shadow. Clad in black armour that seemed to drink the light, he towered over her, his shoulders as wide as the doorframe itself. His face was a mask of chiselled, aristocratic perfection, beautiful and terrifying. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were the colour of a frozen lake, silver and depthless, and they held an emptiness so profound it made her soul ache. And behind him she saw the royal guard, their banners stark against the trees. The king, the Ice King, here at her door, fear, cold and sharp, tried to seize her. But then she felt a small hand slip into hers. Leo stood just behind her, peering around her skirts, his own silver eyes impossibly, terrifyingly, a perfect match for the king's, fixed on the stranger. The king's gaze dropped from her face to the boy. The glacial calm of his expression did not change, but Elara felt it, a shift in the immense, silent pressure that emanated from him. A recognition. "He is mine," the king stated. It was not a question, it was a fact, spoken with the finality of a death sentence. The words were low, devoid of any emotion, yet they carried the weight of absolute power. Elara's fear evaporated, burned away by a sudden, ferocious fire. She instinctively moved, positioning herself more fully in front of Leo, a shield of flesh and bone against a mountain of steel. "His name is Leo," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "I know what he is," the king replied, his frozen eyes returning to her. "I have come to take him home." The world narrowed to the space between them. The king, the crown, the guards, they all faded away. There was only this man, this force of nature, and her son. The boy she had nursed through fevers, whose tears she had dried, whose laughter was the only music in her life. "No," she whispered. The king's head tilted, a minute predatory movement. "That was not a request." "He has a home," Elara said, her voice gaining strength. "He has a life. You cannot just appear after 10 years and claim him like a lost sword." A flicker of something, was it surprise? Irritation? Passed through those silver depths. No one had ever spoken to him this way. No one had ever dared. He took a step forward, and the sheer force of his presence should have sent her stumbling back in terror. She did not move. She held his gaze, her own moss-green eyes filled not with defiance, but with a plea so raw and powerful it resonated in the cold emptiness of his chest. It was the fierce, unconditional love of a mother. A thing he understood only in theory, and that strange warmth flickered again, stronger this time. It was coming from her. This unassuming Omega was a tiny hearth in the midst of his endless winter. He did not understand it, he did not like it, but he could not ignore it. His mind, a machine of cold logic, re-evaluated. Taking the boy by force would be simple. But the boy was watching, his small face a mask of fear and confusion. Tearing him away from the only mother he had ever known would break him. A broken heir was a liability. And there was her, this anomaly, this source of warmth. A new, unprecedented strategy formed in his mind. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It was necessary. "Very well," the king said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "You will both come." The Isafang citadel was aptly named. It was a fortress of pale grey stone that clawed at the sky, its towers like shards of ice. Frost glittered permanently on its parapets, and the air within its halls was perpetually cold, a reflection of its master. For Elara, arriving there was like being swallowed by a glacier. She and Leo were given chambers in a wing of the castle that was, if not warm, then at least less frigid than the rest. The rooms were opulent, filled with silks and carved wood, but the luxury was a cold comfort. It was a beautiful cage. Leo, after his initial fear, became quiet and watchful, clinging to her side as they navigated this strange, cold new world. King Cailan was a constant, distant presence. He did not summon them. He did not command them. He simply observed. Elara would feel his eyes on her as she walked with Leo in the frost-covered gardens, where the roses were frozen in a state of perpetual fragile bloom. She would look up to a high window and see his silhouette, a dark, motionless sentinel. She did not cower. She did not perform. She spoke quietly to Leo, pointing out the ice patterns on the window panes, telling him stories of the sun. She met the king's gaze across the cold expanse, her expression unreadable, her posture unbroken. She was a small, quiet flame of defiance in his frozen world, and he found himself utterly captivated. He had brought her here for the boy's sake, a temporary measure to ease the transition. That was the logic, but his own gaze kept returning to her. He watched her kindness with his son, a gentle, unwavering thing. He watched her walk through his palace, unafraid and unimpressed. She did not seek favour. She did not flinch from the suspicious glares of the court. She simply existed, and her existence was a question he could not answer. The warmth he had felt at her door had not returned, but the memory of it lingered, a phantom limb of feeling. He found himself seeking her out with his eyes, a strange subconscious pull. He told himself it was curiosity, an anomaly required study, but deep beneath the ice, something ancient and dormant had been stirred. The court, of course, did not approve. Lord Valerius, his oldest adviser, a man whose heart was nearly as cold as his own, sought him out in the throne room. "Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice a dry rustle of old parchment, a word of counsel. Cailan did not look at him, his gaze fixed on the snow falling outside the great window. "Speak, this Omega. She is a distraction. The boy is your heir, he must be hardened, prepared for his duties." Her presence softens him, it softens the purpose of your decision. Valerius's tone was laced with disapproval, and the court whispers. They see her as a peasant who has somehow bewitched you. "I am not bewitched," Cailan said, his voice flat. The ice in his veins seemed to sharpen at the adviser's words. "She is a custodian, a temporary one." "Then dismiss her," Valerius pressed. "Send her back to her village with a bag of gold. The boy will forget. Children do." Cailan turned his head slowly, his silver eyes pinning Valerius in place. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "The boy is my blood. His well-being is not a matter for debate. She will remain as long as I deem it necessary." Valerius bowed his head, but not before Cailan saw the dissent in his eyes. "As you command, Your Majesty." The adviser retreated, leaving Cailan alone once more in the echoing silence. Valerius was right, of course, from a logical standpoint. The Omega was an emotional variable in a political equation. She should be removed. And yet the thought of sending her away, of extinguishing that small, quiet flame, left a void in him that felt colder than the curse itself. It was an irrational, unacceptable attachment. And it was growing. Days turned into a week. Elara established a routine. Mornings with Leo in the vast, silent library, his small finger tracing the words in books he was just learning to read. Afternoons in the frozen gardens, their breath pluming in the cold air. Evenings by the fire in their chambers. The only place in the castle that felt truly warm. She saw the king's suffering. It was in the permanent tension of his jaw, the way he held himself with rigid control, as if bracing against a constant internal storm. She saw it in the fine layer of frost that sometimes clung to his black steel gauntlets, even indoors. The servants whispered that the king never slept, that his chambers were as cold as a tomb. They feared him, but Elara was beginning to feel something else, a strange, unwelcome pang of empathy. One evening, she found him standing before a hearth in the grand hall. The fire roared, a beast of orange and red, but he stood so close she could feel its heat from across the room, yet he seemed utterly unaffected. He was staring into the flames, but his silver eyes were distant, looking at something far beyond the fire, or perhaps deep within himself. He was not wearing his gauntlets, and she saw that his hands, though perfectly formed, were pale, almost translucent, the skin stretched taut over the knuckles. She walked toward him, her soft slippers making no sound on the stone floor. This was foolish. This was dangerous, but the question rose in her throat, unbidden and undeniable. He did not turn as she approached, but she knew he was aware of her. His stillness was that of a predator, absolute and all-seeing. She stopped a few feet away, the heat of the fire warming her face, the cold emanating from him chilling her back. She took a breath. "Your Majesty." His eyes shifted, meeting hers. The emptiness in them was a physical force. "Are you in pain?" The question hung in the air between them, simple, direct, and utterly revolutionary. For centuries, people had asked for his judgment, his favour, his leadership. They had offered him fealty, fear, and flattery. No one had ever asked him about himself. No one had dared to see the man inside the monarch, the prisoner inside the armour. Kaelan felt her words like a physical blow. They bypassed the ice, slipping through a crack he hadn't known existed, and struck something buried and long forgotten. The silence in the hall deepened. The fire crackled, a stark, lonely sound. He stared at her, at this Omega who looked at him not with fear or awe, but with genuine heart-stopping concern. Something inside him broke. A seal that had held for 300 years, brittle with age and loneliness. The truth, a secret he had carried until it had become part of his very bones, clawed its way to the surface. "It is not pain," he said, his voice rough, as if dredged up from a deep, frozen well. "Pain is a feeling. I do not have those." He turned his body fully toward her, extending his bare hand. "I have this." She looked down. His skin was laced with a delicate, terrifying pattern of crystalline frost, like a winter fern etched onto marble. It was not on his skin, it was in his skin. "It is a curse," he continued, the confession a torrent now, unstoppable, the frost heart. "Placed upon my ancestor 1,000 years ago. With every generation, it grows stronger. My heart, it is turning to ice. It has been freezing for my entire life, slowly, year by year, killing every emotion, every sensation of warmth. Now, there is almost nothing left, just this." He gestured to the hall, to his kingdom, to himself. This cold, this silence, he had expected her to recoil. To show fear, or worse, pity, he had revealed the monstrous truth of himself, the secret that kept his crown secure and his soul in torment. He waited for the inevitable revulsion. Elara looked from his crystalline hand to his desolate eyes. She saw the centuries of solitude, the crushing weight of an affliction born in absolute silence. She saw a man more profoundly alone than anyone she had ever known. The king's power, his fearsome reputation, it all fell away, revealing the core of his tragedy. She did not offer a solution. She did not gasp in horror. She simply met his gaze, her own eyes soft with an understanding that went beyond words. "It must be so lonely," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Loneliness. He hadn't even had a name for the great grey void inside him for over a century. But her words gave it shape, and in naming it she shared its burden. The confession had not brought judgment, but communion. A crack appeared in the glacier around his heart, and through it for the first time, leaked a single agonizing drop of feeling. Gratitude, the moment hung between them, fragile and sacred. The king, the great and terrible Ice King, stood utterly still, undone by 4 simple words of empathy. He slowly retracted his hand, the vulnerability passing, replaced by his usual rigid control, but the shift was irrevocable. He had let her in. He had shown her the monster, and she had not run. From that night, the atmosphere in the citadel changed, at least between the two of them. A silent understanding now existed. When their eyes met across a hall or a courtyard, it was not as king and subject, but as 2 souls sharing a terrible secret. Cailan found himself engineering reasons to be near her. He would request Leo's presence in the strategy room, ostensibly to learn the maps of his kingdom, but his own attention would be on Ilara, who sat quietly in a corner, mending one of the boy's tunics. Her quiet, focused presence was a balm to the restless silence in his mind. One night he found her in the library, a place he rarely visited. The cold in his hands made turning the brittle pages of old books a clumsy, frustrating exercise. She was running her fingers over the spines of the leather-bound tomes, a small, wistful smile on her face. Leo loves the stories in these, she said, not seeming surprised by his appearance. But my reading is too slow to do them justice. I cannot read them at all, he confessed, the admission costing him nothing now. He showed her his stiff, pale fingers. The cold makes them useless for such delicate work. An idea, bold and perhaps foolish, sparked in her mind. Perhaps I could read to you, Your Majesty. The offer was astounding in its simplicity and its intimacy. He, who had commanded armies and dictated laws, was being offered a kindness one might show a child. He should have refused. It was beneath his dignity. Instead, he found himself nodding. They sat by the library's hearth, a low burning fire that did little to warm the vast, cold room. She chose a book of old legends, her voice soft and clear as she read. It was not a masterful oration, but it was steady and calm, and the sound of it washed over him, a gentle tide against the shores of his frozen consciousness. He closed his eyes. For the first time he could remember, the silence in his head was not empty. It was filled with her voice. It was a form of peace. He did not realize he had moved until his fingers brushed against hers on the arm of the chair. He flinched, expecting her to draw back from his icy touch. She did not. She simply paused in her reading, her own hand turning slightly, her palm resting against the back of his. Her skin was warm, so incredibly, miraculously warm. It was not the impersonal heat of a fire, but a living, breathing warmth that seemed to seep past his skin, past the frost, and into his very blood. A current of energy, gentle and life-affirming. He stared at their joined hands. Where they touched, the crystalline patterns on his skin seemed to recede. The stark white fading to a healthier pale. A gasp caught in his throat. Hope. It was a terrifying, brilliant, agonizing sensation. A feeling he had thought long dead and buried. It exploded in his chest, a supernova of possibility. If her touch could do this, what else was possible? Could he feel the sun again? Could he hold his son without fear of chilling him? Could he live? The hope was a foreign body, a hostile invader in the ecosystem of his curse. And the curse, sensing its impending demise, fought back. It began as a sharp, cold pain in the centre of his chest, a needle of ice driving straight into his heart. He cried out, a raw, broken sound that tore from his throat. He clutched his chest, doubling over. The hope vanished, consumed by a tidal wave of agony. Your Majesty. Alara cried, her hand flying from his as he convulsed. The ice was spreading. Violently he could feel it, a malevolent, conscious entity surging through his veins, reclaiming its territory with brutal force. The crystalline patterns bloomed across his hands, racing up his arms, over his neck. Frost spiderwebbed across the floor from where he stood. The very air around him plummeting to impossible temperatures. He collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged, frosty plumes. The world was fading to a pinpoint of white, the pain absolute. The curse was finishing its work. It was encasing him completely, sealing him in a tomb of his own body. His last conscious thought was of her face, her horrified, moss-green eyes, the last memory of warmth he would ever have. Alara screamed for the guards. They burst into the library, their faces paling at the sight of their king, writhing on the floor, a visible aura of frost radiating from him. The room had become a winter tomb, her own breath freezing in front of her face. They carried him to his chambers, their hands wrapped in thick cloth to protect them from his deadly cold. The castle healers came and went, their faces grim. They could do nothing. Potions froze before they could be administered. Poultices turned to ice against his skin. The king was dying, being consumed by a winter from within. Alara stood vigil outside his door, helpless, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. This was her fault. She had given him hope, and that hope had poisoned him. Her warmth had awakened the beast, and now it was devouring him. The great doors to the king's chambers opened, but it was not a healer who emerged. It was Lord Valerius. His face was a mask of cold triumph. "This is your doing, Omega," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You and your sentimental poison." "What are you talking about?" Alara whispered, her body trembling. "The Frostheart is not a curse," Valerius sneered, stepping closer. "It is a crucible, a tool of purification placed upon the bloodline to burn away the weakness of emotion. It creates kings of pure logic, of unyielding strength. It is the source of our kingdom's power." His words were a chilling revelation. He had known, he had approved. "You brought warmth into this castle," he continued, his eyes glittering with cold fire. "You reminded him of the world he had lost. You gave him hope, and hope is the one thing the Frostheart cannot tolerate. It is now completing its work to protect him, to protect the throne from your influence. It will seal him completely, and he will become the perfect, unfeeling ruler he was always meant to be. Or it will kill him. Either way, your interference is over." Guards moved to stand behind Valerius, their purpose clear. They were here to remove her. "You have to let me see him," she pleaded, desperation clawing at her throat. "It is forbidden," Valerius said. "You will be escorted back to your village. The boy stays. He will be raised properly, without your contamination." The threat against Leo was the final spark. Alara's grief and fear coalesced into a diamond-hard point of resolve. She would not run. She would not be banished. She would not let this man, this zealot, destroy the king and steal her son. As the guards reached for her, a strange heat bloomed in her chest. It was not the gentle warmth she had always known, but a fierce, brilliant fire. A power she never knew she possessed, ancient and profound, uncoiled within her. It surged through her limbs, a river of liquid sunlight. She was not just warm, she was warmth. She was the sun to his winter. "The antidote." "No," she said, and her voice did not shake. It rang with an authority that made the guards pause. "I am not leaving him." Valerius laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "You have no choice, peasant." He offered her a silken pouch that jingled with coin. Take this, go live a comfortable life, and forget you ever walked these halls. It is more than you deserve." She was faced with a choice, a life of safety and wealth, away from this palace of ice and death, or a final, desperate stand for the man who had only just begun to feel. Vengeance against Valerius tempted her, a flash of fire. But a deeper instinct prevailed, not vengeance. Healing, love, she looked past the advisor, her gaze fixed on the frozen doors of the king's chambers. She chose him. With a strength she did not know she had, she pushed past the stunned guards. The power roaring inside her was a shield. They could not touch her. She threw open the doors and entered the heart of the storm. The room was a landscape from a nightmare. Ice coated every surface, thick and white. The king lay on his bed, no longer moving. He was encased in a cocoon of translucent ice, his face serene, his silver eyes open and staring at nothing. He was a statue, a monument to a forgotten sorrow. "Cailan," she whispered, the name feeling right on her lips for the first time. She walked to the bed, the cold so intense it burned her lungs. It did not matter. The fire inside her met the killing frost and held it at bay. She reached out, her hands glowing with a soft golden light. She placed them on his chest, directly over the frozen heart that had caused him such agony. She closed her eyes and poured. She poured all the warmth, all the love, all the hope she had into him. It was not a gentle stream, but a deluge, a solar flare of pure life and heat directed at the heart of the curse. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a crack appeared in the ice on his chest, a tiny fissure. Then another, and another. A deep groaning sound filled the room, the sound of a glacier breaking apart. The cracks spread, racing over his body, a web of shattering light. With a sound like 1,000 shattering chandeliers, the ice exploded outward, sublimating into a thick white mist that filled the room. A wave of heat rolled from the bed, a wave of life. Cailan gasped, a ragged, shuddering intake of breath. He sat up, his silver eyes wide and no longer empty. They were filled with confusion, with pain, with wonder. He looked at his hands, truly looked at them. The crystalline patterns were gone. His skin was pale, but it was the skin of a living man. He could feel the softness of the velvet bedspread beneath his fingers. He could feel the warmth of the air on his face. He could feel the frantic, powerful, warm beat of his own heart. He looked at Elara, who knelt by his bed, tears streaming down her face. He saw her, not as an anomaly or a custodian, but as his saviour. His son, the woman who had walked into his endless winter and taught it how to dream of spring. Valerius stood in the doorway, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. The source of his kingdom's power, the doctrine of his life, had been shattered by a peasant Omega's touch. Cailan's gaze moved to him, and for the first time in 3 centuries he felt the clean, righteous burn of fury. "You," he snarled, his voice raw with newfound emotion. "You would have let me become a monster. I was preserving your strength, your majesty." Valerius stammered. "You were preserving my prison," Cailan corrected, rising from the bed. He felt weak, but a new, vibrant strength flowed beneath it. "Guards, seize him, take him to the deepest, coldest cell in this castle. Let him contemplate the virtues of ice for the rest of his days." The guards, awed by the miracle they had witnessed and the fire in their reborn king's eyes, did not hesitate. Valerius was dragged away, his protests lost in the corridor. The room was silent, save for their breathing. Cailan took a step toward Elara, then another. He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently cupped her cheek. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the dampness of her tears. The simple sensation was overwhelming, a symphony of feeling that brought tears to his own eyes. "Elara," he said, her name a prayer. "You saved me. I couldn't let you be so lonely anymore," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation born of centuries of deprivation. He was flooded with everything at once, the scent of her hair, the feeling of her heart beating against his, the overwhelming, earth-shattering power of love. It was more terrifying and more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. "I love you," he declared, the words feeling more real and true than any law he had ever decreed. "Stay not as a custodian, not as a guest, as my queen." Before she could answer, the door burst open and Leo ran in, his face streaked with tears. He saw his mother in the king's arms and stopped uncertain. Cailan released Elara and knelt, opening his arms. For the first time his son did not hesitate. Leo ran to him, burying his face in his father's chest. Cailan hugged him fiercely, finally feeling the warmth of his own child, a connection he had been denied for a decade. He looked over Leo's head at Elara, his eyes shining. A family, whole and warm. 3 months later, the sun streamed through the high-arched windows of the newly renamed Sunstone Citadel. The gardens below were in full, riotous bloom, the roses vibrant and fragrant under the warm sky. The chill was gone from the castle's stones, replaced by a comfortable, lived-in warmth that echoed the change in its master. Cailan stood with Elara on the balcony, watching Leo chase butterflies on the lawn below. His laughter, a sound Cailan was still learning to cherish, carried on the breeze. Cailan's arm was wrapped around Elara's waist, his touch still a source of constant, quiet wonder. He delighted in the simple things, the warmth of a sunbeam, the taste of spiced wine, the feeling of Elara's head resting on his shoulder. A page approached with a bow, holding out a single letter. "From your home village, Your Majesty," he said to Elara, using her new title with a reverence that was now shared by the entire court. Elara took the letter. The handwriting was Lyra's. Her sister's words were a torrent of apology and begging, speaking of the village's shame and her own regret, pleading for a position at court. A few months ago, the letter might have brought a sting of triumph. Now it felt like an echo from a different life, a story about someone else. She read it, then held it out. The warm breeze caught the parchment, lifting it from her fingers. It sailed over the balcony, a white speck against the blue sky, before drifting down into the rose bushes below. She did not watch where it fell. Her past was gone. She was no longer the outcast, the barren Omega, the object of scorn. She was Elara, queen of a renewed kingdom, wife to a man reborn, and mother to a boy who was finally truly home. Cailan watched her, his heart full. He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, warm kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 sun-drenched tomorrows. The silence inside him had been replaced by a symphony, and she was its composer. Here, in her arms, the cursed king was finally, irrevocably, healed.